one of the fastest growing economies of the world to now a slow coach that seems to be losing steam. India's slowdown is making headlines around the world. Hello and welcome to this very special panel discussion. On this show, we try and understand, can India ever achieve double-digit growth figures in the next few years or not? Let me introduce our panel's guests on the show. We've got Gita Gopinath, Professor of Economics at the Harvard University, Zia Mody, Partner at AZB Partners, and Sanjiv Bajaj, MD of Bajaj Finserv. Many thanks all of you for being with us here. Gita, what's your perspective on what's really going on in the Indian economy? The slowdown clearly is worrying.
Yes, I think none of this comes as a big surprise at some level. If you look at the fundamentals, I think this was supposed to be expected. For a country like India, given the level of development it is at, given the quality of its economic institutions and its political institutions, what India requires is consistent, ongoing reform. The last time we had big reforms were in 1990-91, and it looks like now we're back to thinking about doing serious reforms again. So that's a 30-year gap, and that just doesn't work. I mean, it's not surprising that we're going to then have a few years of good growth, and then we're going to have a slowdown. So if we don't get our institutions in better shape, it's not going to work. And there are lots of useful measures and benchmarks that we can use to measure how the Indian economy is doing. So for instance, the World Bank comes out with this report which is called the Ease of Doing Business.
Doing business, where we have terrible rankings. Clearly.
Exactly, where we do very poorly. We rank overall 132 out of 183 nations, and in some specific measures we do really badly. For instance, you would think one of the most important things for business to do well is enforcement of contracts. And enforcement of contracts, India ranks 182 out of 183. Now, what's particularly concerning is that you also get to measure the number of reforms that have been undertaken to address this problem. And if you look at what's happened over the last 4 years, the number of reforms are a precise zero. And you can look at this indicator by indicator, and the number of reforms are a precise zero. Now, that is something India can ill afford. It cannot afford to have these kinds of spasmic reforms that happen once every 30 years and then hope that somehow everything will just play along well for the foreseeable future.
Would you agree with that view, the fact that the political leadership just isn't waking up and realizing the need for those reforms? And how would you actually respond to some of the recent initiatives that have been taken over the last few weeks, especially ever since we've had a new finance minister? Many say that, yes, optimism is back, but there are several others who continue to be pessimistic about the enforcement of some of those measures, and they even say those aren't really reforms. That's what needs to be done, really.
I think I agree with Gita. We unfortunately operate on a policy of crisis management. So when we really reach the last stage, then we think of doing something that was staring us in the face for a long time before. There are so many low-hanging fruits that we can just pluck and monetize and make the animal spirits, as our Prime Minister says, soar again.
Right. But have they soared at all with some of those recent measures?
I think we feel better about things to some extent, but I think
than what you did maybe 6 months ago.
But a large section of business is still saying these are words. Where is the implementation? So if you take the multi-brand retail policy, for example, it made the headlines, it made everyone look good. But if you look at the fine print, it's an enabling policy.
Right.
States haven't signed up to it.
Right.
So do you expect a Walmart or a Carrefour to come in 8 states in India and not the rest? Do you really expect people other than the global giants to spend 100 million on software and back office and not on real estate? We have food inflation, we know the wastage, we know the cold chain, we know what we must have, we need this, but when the policy comes out, it's again a compromise. I think it's a lot to do with the rising power of regional politics.
Absolutely.
I think it's a lot to do with the fact that the government is still diffident. And so I think, we are sort of stuck in these disconnects. There's a lot of disconnect between DIPP in the FinMin and the Reserve Bank, philosophical differences which don't get ironed out. So I think time has come for us to really get our act together for the nation. Am I a long-term optimist? Completely. Do I think that we need to do much more, even in small tranches, very quickly? Yes, I do.
So then the question really remains is, should we just forget about those double-digit growth figures that we were talking about not so long ago when you had top policymakers say, you know what, we're going to see 10% growth levels very soon. And now we're even talking about 5 to 6%, and we're still not seeing the kind of action we should see from policymakers who should absolutely be worried about what's happening to the Indian economy.
Shweta, the funny thing is, if you rewind 3 years ago, what did you have? You had the 9% growth.
Right.
You had the reforms going on, maybe small ones. So the question to ask is, what has changed dramatically? I don't think the external situation has changed so dramatically where it's affecting us negatively to bring us to the current situation.
And we've seen policymakers take that excuse for the longest time, and everybody has told them, you know what, it's all intrinsic. It isn't global. Would you agree?
It is. And if I were to look at one single sector that I think has made a dramatic change for the worse is infrastructure. Right. So I'm talking of roads, I'm talking of energy, I'm talking of your power plants, highways, and all the other allied infrastructure that comes up. If you see between 2002-03 and 2009-10, the significant change in our infrastructure in this country, we've not had in the last 40 or 50 years. It's been very visible. Now, of course, a lot of those came through reform measures, through capital coming in, through a certain governance environment, which facilitated all this. And that is where you're seeing a significant slowdown now. So you have private contractors, your private companies that have done work that are not getting paid. And most of them are not getting paid by state or central government, companies or other institutions. I think if they were just to reverse that, that itself will add directly over a percentage point to GDP and indirectly much more, and change the entire mood.
India's #1 news app just got even better. Download NDTV's new app. Fully optimized for retina display. Full screen view. Faster response time. And Sudoku. NDTV's new iPad app. Download now.